There are moments in history when the world seems to tremble beneath our feet, not with the tremors of earthquakes, but with the shifting of moral ground, spiritual direction, and the very axis of what we've been taught is right, wrong, sacred, and profane. This is one of those moments because it feels to many of us like God is erasing the rules, not bending them, not reinterpreting them, but sweeping them off the table entirely. And in their place, he, or whatever force guides this spinning universe, is writing a dangerous new chapter. This chapter isn't bound by the laws we memorized in holy books. It isn't limited to the boundaries set by the commandments or codes or creeds. No, this is something else, something unruly, unpredictable, and unnerving. A divine disruption, a holy unraveling. And the question we must ask ourselves today is not simply what is happening, but why. For generations, humanity has clung to a belief in order that if we do what is right, according to the sacred texts and whispered traditions passed down by our ancestors, then we will be protected, rewarded, or at the very least, spared. But look around. That promise seems broken. The innocent suffer while the corrupt ascend. The planet burns while leaders preach patience. Justice delays so long that it feels like a form of injustice in itself. And through it all, we ask, where is God? And if he is here, why does he allow this? Maybe we've been asking the wrong question. Maybe the question is not where is God, but what is God doing? Because something is being rewritten. You can feel it in the silence between disasters, in the long pauses between verdicts, in the hollow aftermath of each mass tragedy. The air is thick with a message we don't yet know how to read. The rules we once knew, rules of mercy, of consequence, of divine favor, are vanishing, and new ones are emerging, not revealed from mountaintops, but unfolding in chaos. We were taught that God was constant, unchanging. But what if constancy was never the promise? What if the divine isn't a fixed point, but a force in motion? What if divinity is alive, evolving, even restless? What if this God, our God, is erasing the rules, not out of wrath, but out of need? Because the rules we've clung to have failed us. Because maybe they were never his rules to begin with. How many of those rules were written by frightened men, more interested in control than truth? How many were codified not from divine inspiration, but from politics, fear, or tribalism? How many times have we been told what God wants, only to later find out it served the ones in power far more than it served the people? So what if God is correcting that? What if this divine rebellion is less about destruction and more about liberation? If God is erasing the rules, maybe it's because the rules were chaining us to a smaller version of life than he ever intended. But here's the danger. When the rules vanish, so does the safety net. When the old ways are torn away, what's left is raw and wild and uncertain. This is what makes the new chapter so dangerous, because we don't know what replaces the old system. We are stepping into sacred chaos, and not all of us will make it through unchanged. There is a purging happening, not with fire or flood, but with the slow erosion of certainty. We are watching the dismantling of systems, religious, political, social, and realizing they never stood on solid ground. We are confronting the lies we inherited, the biases buried in doctrine, the cruelty disguised as holiness. And God is not stopping it. In fact, it seems he is orchestrating it. This is not the benevolent shepherd leading us gently across green pastures. This is the fierce wind that breaks down walls, the quake that splits the temple, the voice in the whirlwind that says, you do not know me. And maybe that's the point. Maybe we never did. We knew the version of God that suited us, the one that fit inside our rules and rituals, the one that blessed our wars, validated our prejudices, and forgave our indifference. But that God, safe, predictable, and manageable, may have been an idol carved from our own need for control. And now that idol is being shattered, the real God is emerging from behind the curtain, not to punish, but to reveal. And revelation is always dangerous, because it calls us to look honestly at what we've built and what we've believed. It demands that we ask hard questions. Who does our faith actually serve? What suffering have we overlooked in the name of tradition? What voices have we silenced with the excuse of obedience? This is not a time for easy answers. This is a time for holy discomfort, for wrestling with angels and not being assured of a blessing, for walking through the wilderness and not knowing when or if we'll find the promised land, because that's where we are now, between what was and what will be, between the rules and the rewrite, and maybe that's the only sacred place left. Because in this in-between, we are finally being stripped of illusions. We are being forced to confront ourselves without the protection of systems that once made us feel righteous. We are learning that morality without compassion is cruelty, that belief without doubt is delusion, that worship without justice is noise. And all of this burning away, is divine. It is painful. It is terrifying. But it is sacred. There will be many who cling to the old chapter, who fight to preserve the rules, even when they no longer give life, who shout louder and dig deeper into certainty, as if certainty itself is a substitute for truth. But the voice of God is not always in the thunder. Sometimes it's in the silence that follows the collapse, and in that silence we are invited to listen again, to hear the questions echoing in the void. What kind of world do we want to create? What kind of people do we want to become? What does love look like in action, not just theory? These are the new commandments, written not on tablets of stone, but on hearts broken open by grief, injustice, and awakening. And so the dangerous new chapter begins, not with conquest or decree, but with questions, with doubts, with trembling hands reaching out in the dark, hoping to touch something real. It is dangerous because it dismantles the structures that kept many comfortable. Dangerous because it gives power to the marginalized. Dangerous because it refuses to sanctify injustice. Dangerous because it calls us to be fully human and fully responsible. But it is also holy. Holy in its honesty. Holy in its refusal to settle for easy faith. Holy in its call to love without condition, to seek without end, to question without fear. If God is erasing the rules, maybe it's because he is tired of us using them as weapons, tired of seeing the outcast punished while the powerful are protected, tired of watching love be twisted into shame. Maybe God is clearing the board so that we might learn again what it means to be in relationship, not just with him, but with each other. And maybe the new chapter, though dangerous, is also healing. Maybe the danger isn't in the chaos, but in our resistance to it. Maybe the danger is in refusing to change, not in the change itself, because there is a fire coming, not to destroy, but to refine, a flood, not to drown, but to cleanse, a storm, not to punish, but to awaken. And we must decide now, will we resist it, or will we walk into it with open hearts, ready to be remade? This is not a call to abandon faith. It is a call to deepen it, to strip away what is false so we can rediscover what is eternal, to move from certainty to sincerity, from fear to courage, from rules to relationship. And yes, it will cost us. It will cost us our pride, our comfort, our illusions. It may cost us friends, communities, even identities. But what we gain in return is worth everything. We gain the possibility of a new world, a world not governed by rigid doctrines, but by radical compassion, not divided by belief, but united by shared humanity. That is the dangerous new chapter being written. And though God may be the one holding the pen, he's not writing it alone. We are the ink. Our lives, our choices, our courage, that is what fills the pages. So let us not be afraid. Let us not cling to fading structures or rusted laws. Let us step boldly into the unknown, guided not by fear of divine wrath, but by love for divine truth. Because if God is erasing the rules, it is not to abandon us. It is to set us free. Free to love without limits. Free to believe without borders. Free to build something new, not out of tradition or obligation, but out of hope. Hope that this time we'll get it right. That this time we won't use God to justify hate. That this time we'll remember that the truest form of worship is justice. The holiest prayer is kindness. And the highest law is love. The chapter is being written now. in protest and poetry, in struggle and surrender, in forgiveness and fierce truth-telling. And we each have a line to write, a sentence to shape, a paragraph to live. The old rules are being dismantled before our eyes, often in ways that are subtle but deeply unsettling. For generations, societies have built their identities, institutions, and systems of belief on a set of principles they believe to be timeless. These rules were treated as sacred, many of them drawn from religious doctrines, cultural traditions, and historical precedents. They defined what was right and wrong, who had power and who did not, who was included and who was cast aside. But something is shifting now, profoundly and irreversibly. We are witnessing the slow but undeniable collapse of these once unchallenged frameworks. The rules that were once held up as divine, righteous, or necessary are now being scrutinized. They are being tested under the weight of lived experience, examined in the harsh light of truth, and many are found lacking. What once passed as moral clarity now reveals itself as oppression in disguise. What was called order often came at the cost of justice. What was called tradition often masked inequality, patriarchy, racism, or systemic violence. And as people begin to see this, truly see it, they can no longer pretend that the old rules deserve to remain intact. Many of these rules were never truly divine to begin with. They were written by men, often powerful men, with specific agendas, rules that silenced voices, rules that justified exclusion, rules that demanded blind obedience instead of conscious compassion. And for too long, these rules were accepted as sacred simply because they were old, because they were written in holy books, or because they had been repeated long enough to seem immutable. But age does not sanctify injustice, and repetition does not validate harm. What we are seeing now is a great unraveling. Institutions that claimed moral authority are being exposed for their hypocrisy. Religions that preached love are reckoning with histories of abuse and complicity and oppression. Laws that claimed to protect are being revealed as tools of control. Even within families and communities, the rules of silence, conformity, and shame are being challenged. People are asking dangerous questions, the kind that unravel entire worldviews. And that is what makes this moment so unsettling. It is not just the systems that are being questioned, but the very foundation of how we have defined morality and righteousness. We are being forced to acknowledge that many of the rules we followed, rules we thought would lead us to goodness, actually led us to complicity. They protected structures rather than people. They elevated purity over empathy. They upheld appearance over substance. And so the dismantling begins, not through war or revolution alone, but through a collective awakening, through people refusing to remain silent, through survivors telling their truths, through thinkers, artists, activists, and everyday citizens refusing to pretend that the old way is the only way, through children who ask why, and adults who no longer have satisfying answers. It begins every time someone says that's not right, even if it goes against what they were taught to believe. This collapse is not a tragedy. It is a necessary step toward healing, because a house built on a cracked foundation cannot stand, and the world we have inherited has been built on many such cracks: racism, misogyny, religious extremism, economic inequality, the idea that some lives are more valuable than others, the lie that suffering is deserved, the myth that power equals virtue. These are not accidents. They are embedded into the rules. They are the silent assumptions that have shaped our society, our laws, and even our faiths. And now those assumptions are being uprooted. Slowly, painfully, but inevitably, we are seeing the cost of maintaining a broken system. We are witnessing the spiritual bankruptcy of rules that do not center love, equity, or justice. We are discovering that survival, truth, and freedom often require breaking the very rules we were told would save us. This moment is not about discarding all structure or descending into moral chaos. It is about stripping away what no longer serves life, truth, or human dignity. It is about making space for something better, something truer. The dismantling is not destruction. It is transformation. The end of the old rules is not the end of meaning. It is the beginning of a new search, a deeper calling, a more courageous kind of faith. A divine disruption is underway. And though it may feel like chaos, destruction, or divine silence, it could very well be something far more purposeful and sacred. It is easy in moments of uncertainty to assume that we have been abandoned by God, left alone to face a world that seems to be unraveling. But perhaps we are not witnessing divine absence. We are witnessing divine intervention. Perhaps what feels like the collapse of everything we once relied on is in fact a deliberate and necessary shaking of foundations that were never truly just or sacred to begin with. There are times in human history when the world seems to lose its balance, when wars break out, when institutions fall, when disasters come one after another with no time to grieve or recover. During these moments, many cry out, asking why God allows such suffering, such disorder. But what if the disorder is not accidental? What if it is intentional? What if what we are experiencing is not the abandonment of the divine, but the presence of a force too holy to tolerate falsehood any longer? The world is full of systems that have failed. We see governments that promise justice but deliver only corruption. We see religious institutions that claim to speak for God, yet protect abusers and silence victims. We see economies that reward exploitation and punish vulnerability. We see ideologies that divide rather than heal. These are not simply human failures. They are structures built on deep embedded lies. Lies about who holds power, lies about who deserves to be heard, lies about what is sacred and what is not. And for too long, these lies have gone unchallenged, defended by tradition, protected by fear, and upheld by those who benefit most from the status quo. But now it seems the divine is no longer willing to remain silent in the face of these injustices. Something sacred is stirring, a force that is not content to bless a broken world and call it holy. This disruption may not look like what we expect from God. It does not come with soft words or comforting answers. It comes with exposure. It brings discomfort. It demands reckoning. It rips the masks off systems, people, and ideologies that have worn the costume of righteousness, but acted in cruelty. The divine disruption does not whisper. It roars. It topples idols, even those we built in God's name. It disrupts lives, not to punish, but to awaken. It challenges what we think we know and forces us to ask hard questions. Who have we allowed to suffer in our pursuit of peace? What truth have we buried in the name of tradition? What pain have we ignored because it did not fit into our theology? These questions do not have easy answers, and that is precisely the point. This divine movement is not about simplicity. It is about truth, and truth is often messy, complicated, and uncomfortable. For many, this moment feels frightening. There is loss of certainty, of structure, of safety. But perhaps the safety was an illusion. Perhaps the structures we mourn were always cracked. Perhaps certainty was never faith, but control disguised as belief. God does not always appear in peace. Sometimes God comes as a storm. Sometimes holiness looks like everything falling apart so that something more just, more real, more alive can take its place. We often think of disruption as negative, as something to resist, but not all disruption is destruction. Some is purification, some is liberation, some is sacred confrontation. What is being disrupted today is not the truth of God, but the falsehoods we've layered on top of it, the lies we've called holy, the systems we've defended in God's name, though they were built on exclusion, fear, and power. This divine upheaval invites us not to retreat, but to participate, to look at the brokenness without flinching, to hear the cries of those who were silenced, to let go of the need to be right and instead seek to be real. This is the work of disruption, not to destroy for the sake of destruction, but to clear the ground for something better, something more just, something more loving. We are being called into a new kind of faith, one that can withstand the loss of familiar landmarks, a faith that does not depend on perfect answers, but on radical honesty, a faith that is brave enough to follow God into the unknown, even when it feels like the wilderness. The divine is not gone. The divine is here, in the upheaval, in the breaking, in the revealing, in the truth that refuses to stay hidden any longer. This is not the end of the story. It is the painful beginning of a more honest one. And though it is uncomfortable, even terrifying, it is sacred, because nothing truly holy is built on lies. And sometimes, before we can see the face of God clearly, everything false has to fall away. This new chapter that is unfolding before us is undeniably dangerous, yet just as undeniably necessary. We are living in a time when the foundations we once stood on are being shaken, and in some cases completely removed. The old systems, religious, political, societal, are dissolving, not all at once, and not without resistance, but the erosion is steady. With each revelation of injustice, with each broken silence, with each structure exposed for what it truly is, the old ways crumble a little more. And while this may feel threatening, disorienting, and even unbearable at times, it is also the beginning of something sacred. There is a cost to every kind of awakening. To see the world as it truly is, rather than how we wish it to be, requires that we first unsee all the illusions we've been taught to believe. The illusions of fairness in broken systems, the illusion that tradition always equals truth, the illusion that silence equals peace. The moment those illusions fall, we are left vulnerable, without the armor of certainty, without the safety of knowing exactly where we belong or what role to play. That's why this new chapter feels dangerous, because it strips us of what made us feel secure, even if that security was built on false promises. But that danger is not the kind that leads to destruction for its own sake. It is the kind of danger that accompanies any deep transformation. When a forest burns, it seems like death, but from that ash, new life always begins. In the same way, we are watching certain systems and ideas be reduced to ashes, not because there is no more need for structure or wisdom, but because those particular structures have failed to nourish life. They have failed to grow with truth, and now they must make way for something new. It is tempting in the face of so much uncertainty to try to hold on tighter to what is familiar, to cling to old doctrines, familiar leaders, comfortable rituals, and the illusion of control. But the truth is, the old maps no longer guide us. The world has changed, and so must we. Clinging to what no longer works does not preserve peace. It prolongs pain. This moment calls for courage, not nostalgia, for curiosity, not defensiveness, for openness to the unknown, even when the unknown feels dangerous. Many of us were raised to believe that faith, morality, or truth were stable, fixed things, that if we just followed the right steps, obeyed the right rules, believed the right doctrines, we would be safe, blessed, even righteous. But life has a way of confronting those beliefs. Suffering confronts them. Injustice confronts them. And now we are in a moment where all of it is being confronted at once. That confrontation is not a betrayal of faith. It may be the beginning of a deeper one, because the kind of faith that can survive this dangerous chapter is the kind that refuses to be shallow. It is the kind of faith that knows how to wrestle with hard questions, how to sit in the silence, how to love even when certainty is gone. The danger of this moment is real. There is danger in losing shared language, danger in losing community, danger in standing against powerful systems that resist change. There is danger in speaking truths that disrupt comfort. But without risk, there can be no renewal. Without facing the fire, we cannot be refined. The story of transformation has always included a season of unraveling. Whether it's personal, communal, or spiritual, growth begins in the letting go. What we are being invited into now is not a comfortable path, but a necessary one. It is the path of rediscovery, of asking again what it means to live with integrity, what it means to love deeply, serve honestly, and seek justice with our whole being. The new chapter asks us to rebuild from the inside out, not just our systems, but ourselves. It asks us to reimagine everything, what faith looks like, what community looks like, what power and leadership should be. That is why it is sacred chaos, because out of the dismantling, something new, raw, and true can be born. And what will come next is not clear. That's part of the danger, but it is also part of the beauty. because for the first time in a long time, we are being asked not to perform belief, but to live it, not to memorize what is right, but to become what is good. This chapter may not come with easy answers or familiar comforts, but it offers something far more real, the chance to be transformed, the chance to begin again. Certainty is losing its grip on our hearts and minds, and while that may feel unsettling, it also signals the beginning of something deeper and more honest. For generations, certainty has been prized as the highest form of spiritual and moral maturity. We were taught that faith meant having firm answers, that belief meant being sure, that to doubt or to question was dangerous, even sinful. Entire systems were built around protecting that certainty. Religious institutions, educational doctrines, cultural traditions, all insisting they held the final truth, the absolute way, the unquestionable authority. But that era is fading, slowly, painfully, yet unmistakably. It is dissolving in the face of human experience, complexity, and a growing collective awareness that certainty, when clung to too tightly, can become a form of blindness. What is emerging in its place is not apathy or chaos, but a different kind of seeking, a sincere, humble, and sometimes trembling effort to find what is true, not just because someone said it, but because it resonates with lived reality, with justice, with compassion, and with the deep knowing that sits beneath dogma. People are beginning to realize that it is possible to be faithful and questioning at the same time, that asking hard questions does not mean abandoning belief. It means taking it seriously enough to test it, to stretch it, to let it grow. There is a quiet revolution taking place in hearts and minds all over the world. People are turning away from rigid dogma, not because they want to rebel, but because they want something real. They are tired of rehearsed answers that don't address their pain, tired of formulas that don't account for the complexity of the world, tired of religious or moral systems that ignore injustice in order to preserve tradition. And in this exhaustion, there is a hunger for meaning that is alive, not memorized, for truth that is dynamic, not static. The questions people are asking now are different from the ones that were allowed before. Not how do I stay inside the lines, but who drew these lines and who do they serve? Not how can I defend this belief, but does this belief lead me to love more deeply, to live more justly, to see others more clearly? These questions are dangerous to the status quo, but they are sacred to the human spirit. They move us from shallow conformity to deep authenticity, from rigid allegiance to courageous relationship with the divine, with others, and with ourselves. And yes, this kind of seeking is harder. It doesn't offer the comfort of clear boundaries or quick conclusions. It requires vulnerability, patience, and the willingness to be wrong. It means holding space for mystery, for tension, for the possibility that we may never fully understand the divine, but we can still walk with reverence toward it. This is the shift from the pursuit of correctness to the pursuit of connection, from defending what we think we know to exploring what we have yet to understand. For some, this shift feels like loss, the loss of spiritual certainty, of communal belonging, of inherited identity, and that grief is real. But there is also freedom here. There is room to breathe, to change, to evolve. There is space for the voices that were once silenced. Those who didn't fit into the tidy categories of belief. Those who were exiled for asking the wrong questions or loving the wrong people or refusing to pretend. In this new landscape, there is room at the table for everyone, not because they agree, but because they are seeking with sincerity. This movement away from certainty is not the end of faith. It may be the beginning of a more meaningful one that is not afraid to engage with suffering, to confront injustice, to confess when it has caused harm, a faith that does not place its security in being right, but in being real, a faith that knows truth is not something to be possessed, but something to be encountered, wrestled with, lived out. And it is not only faith that is changing, so too are our understandings of justice, compassion, and morality. In a world overwhelmed by complexity, we are learning that sincerity is more trustworthy than certainty, that a heart truly open to others will often lead us further than a mind locked in unchanging conviction. We are beginning to see that love requires us to keep asking, to keep listening, to keep learning. So this is where we are now, in the sacred space between what we thought we knew and what we are still discovering, between the comfort of fixed answers and the courage of honest seeking. It is not always easy to live in this space. It demands more of us than passive belief, but it also offers more connection, more compassion, more depth, more truth. Not the kind of truth that ends the conversation, but the kind that keeps drawing us forward. The world is being rewritten, not with the same ink of hierarchy, fear, and blind obedience that shaped so many of our past systems, but with something far more powerful and enduring: love, justice, and relationship. These are becoming the new sacred foundations, rising from the rubble of broken institutions and outgrown beliefs. They are not theoretical ideas or lofty sentiments. They are living, breathing principles grounded in action, reflection, and human connection. As the old chapter fades, a new one is emerging, not imposed from above, but built from within. And at its center is not the demand to obey, but the invitation to love. For so long, our societies and faith traditions have leaned on the idea that fear could keep people in line, that punishment was the most effective teacher, that rigid authority was necessary to maintain order. We were told that obedience, often to flawed human institutions, was the same as righteousness. But that model has proven not only inadequate, but deeply harmful. It created systems where questioning was forbidden, where compassion was selective, and where justice was often delayed or denied altogether. In the place of those fading structures, a new ethic is taking root, one that values people not for their conformity, but for their humanity. Love, in this context, is not a passive emotion or a private comfort. It is an active, radical force that refuses to look away from suffering. It does not draw lines between the worthy and the unworthy. It does not ask for perfection before extending kindness. This kind of love heals, disrupts, rebuilds. It sees every human being as sacred, not because they followed the rules, but because they exist. Justice, too, is being redefined. No longer a distant ideal, it is becoming immediate, personal, and urgent. We are realizing that justice delayed is in fact justice denied. We are recognizing that neutrality in the face of oppression is complicity. Justice is not a future reward for the patient and obedient. It is a present necessity for the hurting and marginalized. It is not enough to talk about peace while ignoring pain. True justice confronts systems, exposes inequity, and dares to imagine a world where repair is not only possible but essential. And none of this can happen without relationship, not the kind built on convenience or utility, but the kind built on deep mutual respect, relationships that cross lines of difference, that honor each other's dignity, that listen as much as they speak. We are learning finally that we belong to each other, not as possessions or projects, but as equals. This shift is uncomfortable for those who were accustomed to power without accountability, authority without connection. But it is the only way forward. We cannot heal without one another. We cannot build a new chapter on isolation or domination. The sacredness of relationship lies in its demand that we show up fully, honestly, and with empathy. The new foundations are challenging precisely because they demand our participation. Love without condition requires us to confront our own prejudices and assumptions. Justice without delay demands that we act, not just feel. And relationship rooted in shared humanity forces us to see people we've been taught to overlook, dismiss, or fear. These are not easy tasks. They ask more of us than rules ever did. But they also offer more. They offer the chance to be whole, the chance to be free, the chance to live in alignment with the divine spark that lives in all of us. We must understand that love, justice, and relationship are not new ideas. They are ancient truths that we are finally learning to center. They were buried under centuries of control, fear, and dogma, but they have survived. They are rising again, not as rageous alternatives, but as sacred essentials. They are the heart of every true faith, the core of every just movement, the pulse of every meaningful life. This chapter we are entering is dangerous, not because it lacks order, but because it threatens the wrong kind of order, the kind that protects power over people, the kind that confuses obedience with goodness, the kind that values tradition more than truth. In its place, we are building something different, something alive, something rooted in the lived experience of people who have known both suffering and resilience. We are learning that God is not found in the punishment of difference, but in the embrace of diversity, not in the silence of the oppressed, but in their voices rising. As we write this new chapter together, we must hold these sacred foundations with reverence. Let love guide our choices, not fear. Let justice fuel our actions, not apathy. Let relationships shape our communities, not ideology. This is how the world changes, not overnight, not without struggle, but with each choice we make to center what is real, what is right, and what truly matters. The old ways are crumbling. The new is already here, and it is more beautiful, more human, and more holy than anything fear could ever build. We find ourselves standing at the threshold of a new chapter, a profound rewriting of the story we have known for so long. While it is clear that God or the divine force is the one initiating this grand transformation, tearing down old systems, exposing falsehoods, and calling forth justice and love, humanity is not a passive observer in this process. We are not mere spectators watching from the sidelines as history unfolds. Instead, we are invited to become active co-authors in this unfolding narrative. Our actions, our choices, and our courage are essential threads woven into the fabric of this new story. This realization can feel both empowering and daunting. On one hand, it affirms that our lives matter, that what we do each day has the potential to shape the direction of the world in ways both large and small. On the other hand, it calls us to responsibility, to step up when it would be easier to stay silent, to speak truth in the face of falsehood, to love even when it feels risky or exhausting. This is not a burden to bear alone, but an invitation to participate in a collective act of creation, to join with others who are also working toward a more just and compassionate world. Being a co-author means understanding that we are shaping more than just events. We are shaping meaning. The choices we make about how to respond to injustice, how to treat one another, and how to hold on to hope in difficult times contribute to the spiritual and moral texture of this new chapter. Our courage to stand for what is right, our willingness to admit when we are wrong, and our commitment to growth and healing all write new lines into the story of humanity's journey. In times of uncertainty, it can be tempting to retreat into fear or cynicism, to believe that the problems are too big, the change too slow, or that our individual actions are too insignificant to matter. But history shows us otherwise. Every great movement for justice, every moment of collective awakening began with individuals choosing to act with integrity despite the risks. The new chapter we are invited to co-create is no different. It is written not only by leaders or prophets, but by everyday people, those who choose kindness over indifference, truth over comfort, and connection over isolation. Living truthfully in this new chapter means refusing to hide behind convenience or denial. It means looking clearly at the brokenness around us without turning away. It means acknowledging the pain of the past and the present, but refusing to let that pain define us or dictate our future. Instead, it challenges us to be honest with ourselves and others, to own our mistakes, and to commit to healing in ways that are tangible and lasting. To live boldly means stepping beyond our fears and doubts. It means risking rejection, discomfort, or misunderstanding for the sake of what is right and good. Boldness in this context is not about arrogance or recklessness. It is about grounded confidence rooted in love and conviction. It is the courage to speak out against injustice, to stand in solidarity with those who are marginalized, and to build bridges where walls once stood. Boldness invites us to be leaders in our own spheres of influence, whatever their size, recognizing that collective change begins with individual bravery. Compassion is the heart of this co-authorship. Without it, truth can become harsh, and courage can turn into aggression. Compassion reminds us that everyone is part of this story, even those whose actions we find difficult or whose beliefs differ from our own. It calls us to listen deeply, to seek understanding, and to respond with empathy rather than judgment. Compassion fuels the perseverance we need to keep writing this new chapter, especially when progress feels slow or setbacks threaten to overwhelm us. This moment in history is an invitation to embrace the uncertainty that comes with transformation. The old maps no longer serve us, and the paths ahead are not always clear, yet, in this space of not knowing, there is also freedom. The freedom to imagine new possibilities, to create new ways of being, and to redefine what it means to live a good life. We are called to be creators, dreamers, and builders who refuse to be paralyzed by doubt, but instead let it fuel our curiosity and growth. In recognizing ourselves as co-authors, we also affirm our interconnectedness. No one writes this chapter alone. Our stories intersect, our choices ripple outward, and our collective efforts build the world we all share. This interconnectedness brings responsibility, but also immense hope. Hope that when we come together across differences, across divides, we can craft a narrative that reflects the highest aspirations of humanity. Love that heals, justice that restores, and relationships that nurture. So while the divine initiates this rewrite, it is through our participation that the story gains depth, texture, and life. Each of us holds a pen in this sacred act of creation, whether through small acts of kindness, brave stands for justice, honest conversations, or committed advocacy. We shape the future. We become the living embodiment of the values this new chapter demands. In this way, the new chapter is not just about change in the world out there. It is about transformation within us of our hearts, our minds, and our spirits. It calls us to embody the very qualities of love, justice, and relationship that the new story seeks to center. It invites us to live truthfully, boldly, and compassionately, embracing the uncertainty with faith that our contributions matter. Together, as co-authors, we are crafting a story not only for ourselves, but for generations to come. A story of hope rising from the ashes of the old. A story where the divine and human work hand in hand to bring forth a world more just, more loving, and more whole.